Welcome back, Simple Healthy Life podcast, where our goal is to have real, insightful conversations on topics that we find interesting. Today, we're going to tackle a big one, and self-awareness. Been doing a lot of working in developing some curriculum, and I actually thought I would start with self-awareness, and thanks to you, we realized we don't even want to start there. But for this podcast today, we're going to start with self-awareness and kind of what it is. And more importantly, can we look at it as a skill? Can we look at it as something that we can build for a good reason? We can get into the reasons eventually. But I want to start by wondering or asking, maybe you and asking the audience, asking whomever is listening, when did you purposefully learn about self-awareness? And that might be a trick question for some of us. How old were you before you were thought that you should have a certain level of self-awareness that other people expected you to have in order to fit into society? And who was the person that helped you learn about self-awareness? I think those might be trick questions for a lot of people. So I'll put you on the spot. You got any answers?
Yeah, it is an interesting question. I mean, I first learned of the term self-awareness really not too long ago, maybe 10 years ago or something like that, just passing comments of people noting lack thereof self-awareness. He's not very self-aware, et cetera, et cetera. But I think I practiced self-awareness from a very early age, I think. And I suppose there's different levels, right? Because as it's a skill, it takes some developing. But I had this like profound moment when I was very young. I must have been, I don't know, 12, 13, something like that. And I remember like looking into a mirror and having a conversation with myself. I think it was in my head. At least I imagine it so. But I remember kind of reviewing my current state of affairs, where my life was and how my thoughts were. And I remember having this like almost maybe my first experience of metacognition. So having a thought and then having another thought about the thought, right? And so it's like put out a thought and then what do I think about that thought that I had? And what do I think about the thought that I just had You know, like kind of going down the line a bit there. And to me, it was very, very helpful.
Yeah, so it just kind of hits you one day. Oh, I have the ability to notice a thought.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I would say that my self-awareness, looking back, and I don't want to be too hard on myself because it's not really fair, but I was very not self-aware. I guess I would say I was so not self-aware that I didn't understand or didn't care or didn't notice like your feelings around whatever I was saying or doing. But let's define self-awareness here for a moment, just so everybody knows what we're talking about, because we're going to talk about building a skill. We want to talk about exactly what that skill is. So self-awareness is the understanding of we call the cognitive triangle: your thoughts, your feelings, and your actions. Right? And all three of those things actually really make up your personality. And we can get into some other psychology stuff about the id and the super-id, or this ego and the super-ego. But for us today, we're just going to talk about your thoughts driving a feeling, and this is the thing that a lot of people who are not self-aware miss, and then making an action happen. Or, and this is where we want to get into today, or it could be the action that happened first, and then the way you felt about it drove those thoughts, right? So just by stating that out there, just by putting that out there, I think a lot of people are probably wondering like, well, what is it? Or do I notice my thoughts driving my feelings, driving my actions? So I'm going to give you a very rudimentary example. And you're walking through the grocery store, you got your hands full, and you drop the glass jar of tomato sauce, and it breaks all over the place. Not a big deal. Didn't do it on purpose. But you're frustrated almost immediately. Whether you're frustrated at the jar for breaking, which could be a thing, or you're frustrated at yourself for dropping it, or you don't have enough time to pick it up, or whatever the case may be. Now you start to think, this is stupid. I'm stupid. I can't believe that happened. I'm so frustrated, angry. All of the things, all of the thoughts come in, right? And then what happens next? Well, generally what happens next is somebody comes over and tries to help you. Are you self-aware enough to not snap at the person or not jump back and apologize and do all the things that we normally just reactively do? Because you're not in the right mind. You just dropped something. You just broke something. You're frustrated. You have a feeling in your body that is not you. You're not being yourself. So can you be self-aware enough to step back and be like, okay, the situation is the glass broke. There's likely to be someone coming over to help me. If not, I can go find somebody. And I also have to go find more spaghetti sauce, right? Hopefully it didn't get on my shoes. Right? That's all that really happened.
Yeah.
But you think about it. Think about the interaction and what generally happens to us.
Right. I mean, it is an interesting point. I think of two different type of people in this. For whatever reason, my grandmother, she would probably react in a very like angry way. Like like she would be frustrated. Like I think the core fundamental emotion feeling there is like, yeah, frustration. That sucks. It's a big mess. But I think she would react as like being pretty angry and probably blaming whoever came to like come help her. Right? It's like, why don't they make these jars plastic? Or blah 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 blah. Right. But then I can also see another thought process, same feeling, frustration, yet maybe it goes into like, ooh, I'm stupid. Why did I do that? Why do I always do this, right? And so to me, it was just kind of interesting to think about like the two thought pathways, the ones that I'm, at least I think are familiar to me and what I observe.
Yeah, well, you got there. You realized that there were two thought pathways, and then there were very two distinct emotions next, which is interesting, right? One was a feeling of anger, and the other one was a feeling of like less than, not good enough, stupidity, always me, woe is me.
Right.
The question is, what happens next in your personality, in your cognitive triangle? There's an action that's going to come up. What's that action going to be? Are you going to storm off? Are you going to behave in such a way that makes this other person kind of think that you behave this way all the time and you're be a jerk to them, right? Or loud or demonstrative or whatever? Or are you going to be able to step back from the situation, respond, don't react, recognize that even though I do have a feeling in my body, yes, I'm probably not going to change immediately. I'm still going to think I'm stupid for dropping the thing, right? I'm probably in a hurry and all the things. But can I step back and say, okay, that reaction is not who I really am. So while I feel it, I'm just going to step back and be like, that's just a feeling. Okay, cool. Hey, I could use a hand. I got to pick up this tomato sauce, right? Whatever the case may be.
Right.
And that skill, it's a real thing. We look at people and say, and you kind of alluded to it, right? Like we look at people that can do that as just having naturally calm demeanor, right?
Yeah.
And then we look at the other people and we see the interaction. We're like, well, we don't want to be that way. Right? We're walking by, we're like, yeah, that sucks, right? But what I think the people that and react in that way and are freaking out, a lot of them fail to recognize that's the skill they can work on to become more of themselves. What I'm saying is that these people are they're not bad people. They don't like, while they may go through their day that way because they're not self-aware, they're not bad people. They wasn't intentional. There's nothing intentional about breaking the glass or yelling at the person that came to help them.
Right.
They actually weren't even realizing that they were doing it.
Right.
They were just so out of control, out of that touch with their own self-awareness.
Yeah. Actually, it brings up a conversation that I had, I don't know, however long ago with a client, and it's very similar, right? This person was struggling with emotional reactivity just in general. So sometimes these topics would come up as we're talking about whatever. And this person had recognized, we were working on some self-awareness, I think, and this person had recognized being in a grocery store, something happened that frustrated them. And they told me, well, Ryan, when I did this thing, when someone bumped into me or I bumped into someone, I recognized I was a frustrated person. And I kind of stopped them right there. And I was like, you're not a frustrated person. You're not an angry person. You were a person who was feeling frustrated. And so you had the fallout from that. And that is always one thing I feel is important to share is, separating yourself from the feeling that's, happening right now. You're not a frustrated person. You are feeling frustrated right now. That's
Right.
I say it that way because every time I'm feeling like a specific, like, stronger emotion, I literally go inward and I'm like, I am feeling sadness right now, or whatever it is. It's like, it's very mechanical, but it helps me separate a little bit from like being more reactive, I guess.
Yeah, well done. Yeah. Acknowledging that, being self-aware, noticing, and then respond, don't react. And we get into right action a lot. And right action requires an enormous amount of self-awareness. It's like almost self-awareness to the next level. First, be aware of why you feel the way you feel, not just that you feel the way you feel. So step one, notice how you feel. Step two, why do I feel this way? Step three, does it challenge any type of belief system that I have? No. Okay, great. So what's the next logical action? What's the next thing that I should do next? And it'll come, and then do that. Whereas the alternative is the glass breaks, you yell, someone comes, you yell more, never having once thought, why am I yelling? What does this person have to do with it? And then you finish, and sometimes you even go as far as to, like, tell the people around you how right you were because you were so unself-aware as to what was really happening. I'm guilty of that, I'm sure. But we can train that skill. And I think we need to train that skill. When I opened the podcast by asking you, like, who trained you? Who helped you? Who taught you how to do it? Who showed you?
Yeah.
I was kind of being silly because it's just not something we do. It's almost like one of the interesting, like, games of pass the buck, right? You get to school and they're like, well, your parents should teach you how to be self-aware, right? And then you get to a certain level of school and they're like, well, your middle school teacher should have told you how to be self-aware, right? Like, and it's like, well, where didn't you, wow, this guy didn't learn how to be self-aware. Do you believe that? This guy didn't learn that either, right? Yeah. But it's like, well, who helped you?
Right.
When did you learn? What were the things you did to learn that? And it's like, and nobody has the answer. The answer is, well, I just kind of fit into society. Now think about this. Society. We live in an environment, and you live in it right now, drastically like, or an extreme example of it, where you're expected to have 15 interactions a day with 15 different people, one right after another, right after another, right after another, right after another. And if you're in, like, a retail or a restaurant environment, it's 30 interactions, right? And if you're in a leadership environment, maybe you're on a call with hundreds of interactions all day. Never once checking in to say,
Right.
what's my feeling right now? What is the right action right here? It's just go, answer, off the cuff. Oh, next meeting ends, next meeting starts, grab some lunch. At the end of the day, maybe you get the opportunity to be reflective.
Right.
So while you can't change that, right? That's not going to change. What you can do is practice the skill of being self-aware when you're not in that environment. Does it make sense?
Yeah, yeah. And it's something that speaks to some of my work too, because there are some days I am just like going from emotional conversation to emotional conversation, and I can't even take a moment to recalibrate in between because I'm like running over with a client and then the other client's in the waiting room and I'm like trying to get them, and there isn't a real good moment for me to I guess check in on me. And sometimes it's, I get a minute or two and I'm checking in on other people, right? Like with the phone and whatnot. So yeah, it does speak to me. One thing that I've been practicing for that is being more intentional about during transitions. And I noticed that, like, carrying emotions or feelings, or even if they're not mine, just carrying other people's emotions, feelings sometimes into the next activity. And you can see how it destroys intentionality. And so I've really been trying to every transition, which is, I mean, we have so many a day. Like I'm talking like in the car going home, or even coming into the studio, right? Like there are moments where you're transitioning from one scene to the next, if it were a movie, and you can sit there and just take a minute, do a couple deep breaths, like find that anchoring there, and then set an intention. How do I want to approach this person, right? Just doing that, I found it to be super helpful, because there are times where I'm drained and I'm just autopilot, default mode network going and chatting with someone, and they can just sense that drained feeling that I have, but I don't want that either, right?
Yeah. No, good job. Good job just taking that time for yourself to check in with yourself. And that's a level of self-awareness. Noticing it is first. Noticing is paramount. I can't stress this enough. And it's said awareness is the first step towards change. But I would like to say it as awareness is the first step towards growth. And we all want positive change, so we're going to go with positive change, right? If you want to make a negative change, well, you have to be aware of it, of course. We know this is true. Or the negative changes happen when you're not aware. Right? The things slip up when you're not aware of them. They wouldn't have slipped up if you were aware. But why, when I think about, now let's get into like, what do you do to practice? Right? What do you do to practice the skill of self-awareness? First and foremost, don't roll your eyes. Right? Don't think it's silly. It's an actual skill.
Right.
So any type of meditation, right? Any type of closing your eyes, choosing to bring your focus where you want your focus to go, and then keeping your focus wherever you want your focus on. So for everybody involved, we know that the breath is there. So that's why we use the breath. And just focusing consistently on the breath coming in and the breath coming out. Then start to ask yourself or notice, what are the thoughts that are happening that are pulling me away from what I'm trying to do right now? What I'm trying to do right now is just watch my breath go in and out. Okay, well, our thoughts kind of come in pretty quickly, especially for all of us. We won't even say, for all of us. Okay, cool. What was the thought? All right, let it go again. Do it again. Back to my breath, back to my anchor, back to my focus. I'm trying to practice the skill of becoming more self-aware. Oop, another thought. Cool. All right, what was that one? Now, the interesting thing about this is sometimes thoughts come in with emotions. We know this is true. That thought dragged in an emotion. Think about like a truck with a trailer behind it. The thought's the truck, and the emotion is the trailer. So you're there, sitting, thinking about your breath, trying to think out your breath, and all of a sudden this thought comes in that brings an emotion with it. Wow, interesting. Now I'm seeing in real time thoughts and emotions in an easy environment where you don't have to worry about what the people around you are going to say. So you can start to become more aware of that stuff. And then by focusing on it, and because we know the brain's neuroplasticity and ability to do what you want it to do, you're going to be better at it out in the real world. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What's interesting too is the idea of an emotion and feeling that in a meditation, right? Like the thought you mentioned, the thought comes up kind of like a truck, and it brings with it a feeling of some sort. And sometimes that happens to me as I'm meditating, and I just try to feel what that feeling feels like physically, right? What does that actually feel like? Is it part of the center of the brain? Is it in your chest area? Like sometimes anxiety will come up, and physically it feels chesty, right? Like you know that. And so I always find that interesting. But that is a good tip. Just practice some more meditations. Think about the thoughts that are coming up, right? Do you ever practice or ever recommend a specific type of journaling for that, or diary, or something along those lines?
Yeah, I like the idea. I love my journal, and I look at it more of a reflection, and I actually use the journal in the same way I use the meditation, where I just write down the thoughts that come in. Just a very shorthand, very keyword, just write them down. And then it helps me to see them. I actually haven't gone into journaling and writing down the emotions that I felt, but I will share this with the group. When I first got into journaling, I didn't write a single negative thing in my journal for an entire year. I swear to God.
Yeah.
It was interesting because that journal lasted 1 year. It wasn't, I don't know how many pages it was. It wasn't exactly 365 pages. I didn't perfectly journal every day. But whatever it was like coming down to the end of the year, I had like 6 pages left and I was like, all right, cool. Like I did it. I'm a stud. Like I can journal. I did this, right? I filled up an entire journal and I felt really good about it. And then I kind of really looked at it. I just went back and was like, I didn't write a single negative thing.
You have a perfect life.
I sugarcoated it for myself, and in days when you could almost tell through my writing that I was like not excited about my writing, like I was still wrote stuff like I'm grateful and gratitude and things like that. But I don't think that's the way to do it. And taken from someone who did it for an entire year.
Right.
I think it's more impactful to write down those things that are coming up when they aren't positive. So
I agree. There's been times where I do the same thing. I more so focus just generally on like the gratitude and the good things. But there have been times where I've been really frustrated or really emotionally charged, I suppose, and I would get there, and sometimes I would type it out or write it out. But I would just go off, just like crazy wild stuff that I would never say, but it was kind of nice to have it in like a journal, and it did feel like relieving in a sense to get the like negativity out, right? To get those thoughts out, because I know those aren't me, but they're hanging around in the brain, and I just like needed to get them out, and so that was super helpful.
Yeah, I can give you an example, and I've been very open on this podcast, so I guess there's no reason to stop now. This Sunday morning, I was journaling, and I did my meditation first, and I felt a feeling that I wasn't totally familiar with. And as I wrote down how I felt, I came to this word, and it's going to scare me, but it was resentment. And I started to think like, the fuck, what do I know about resentment? Has anybody ever, do I have anything to be resentful for? Why is this word here? What is this feeling that I'm feeling right now? And why do I put those two things together? So I wrote it down. I didn't have the answer, and I still don't know where it came from, but I can explore it more. But it was definitely that feeling, even if it wasn't resentment and I'm wrong about the feeling, something was driving my behavior that morning. Yeah. I was not happy. I was not my normal upbeat, go after everything self. I was in a downward mood, and I was aware enough of it to know it was being driven by an emotion. Luckily, I had my journal. I was sitting in my Jeep. I was just sitting there. I had to go teach a class. And I was just sitting there like, why? What's going on here? What's my deal? Right? Coffee didn't taste good. Like, I don't know what it was, but I was trying to write it down. So, I mean, I said a lot there because it's very deeply personal for this week, because I haven't really dealt with that thought of resentment. I don't even know what it is that I would be resentful about. Right. But maybe that's something that none of us explore very often.
Right. Right. And I think I see that as I work with clients too. Sometimes we're talking about coping with food, right? The action that's following a particular feeling and what precedes that feeling is maybe a thought, right? And there'll be like binge eating or not eating and not necessarily recognize that it is tied to an emotion. And like, well, how are you feeling? How did you feel that day? Well, now that you mention it, my boss came in and didn't give me the raise I was looking for, et cetera, et cetera. And it's like, well, there you go. There's part of your issue is that you're not coping effectively. You're not even at the stage of coping. You haven't even gotten to identifying or recognizing the fact that emotion's present. And so I think it is hard to try and identify, even with this base like idea of like, I've got this resentment going on. Like, where does this even come from? It may not come from anything particularly important or impactful, really, but it's there. And so now, what do you what do you do? How do you handle that?
Yeah. Well, luckily, I wrote it down. I went in. I had a great class. I really do believe, though, becoming aware of it was like a stopping point. Like up until that point, I had maybe interacted with 2 or 3 people. I think I got a coffee, and then my interactions weren't. Now I'm just reflecting on this. My interactions weren't negative, or so to speak. They weren't positive. I wasn't outwardly one way or the other. But in my own head, I had some stuff going on. But I was able to become self-aware enough to say, if that's going on, if this is true, that I have this feeling, whatever it is, I came to the conclusion it was wrong, maybe it wasn't. Can I leave it here in this journal before I get out of my Jeep and go interact with a bunch of people that I want to have a good time with? And I was able to do that. I don't think the old me could have done that. I don't think the younger me, the one that didn't practice this skill, could have done that, or would have been aware enough to even try. Where I just went about my day, went in, had this attitude about whatever my attitude was about. I wouldn't even know, so no one could ask me. Probably be that guy who's like, "What's wrong? Nothing." Right? What, you seem like something's off. No. Okay, cool. Like other people notice, but you don't. Right. That was my level of self-awareness. Now, at least for that day, for that time, I was able to practice enough to be able to say, okay, this is what's going on. And the journaling was a great tool.
Right. I mean, I think a big part of that is just being open to the idea that, your thoughts are leading into feelings, and feelings are leading into actions, or even the base feeling is leading into some action, and not being too proud to admit that, right? It's like the guy who's like, "Oh, nothing's wrong," right? Maybe a little too proud to admit that he's being a little sourpuss and not impacts other people, and you would only notice that if you were self-aware. So I think in terms of like wrapping this topic up for today, I mean, it feels like this is a very expansive subject, so
definitely
we'll talk more about this, I'm sure. But what are some things that someone could do practically today to just start them off on the right foot?
Yeah. So the game, or the skill, is about noticing without any type of judgment. So if you think about a learning environment, is it easier to learn something at the airport, or is it easier to learn something at a school, or is it easier to learn something one-on-one? Right? I would say the least amount of distraction is the best. So to practice this skill, I would turn all of the things off. Turn off the music, close your eyes. Attempt to notice as many things as you can. Use the breath as the anchor, and just notice. No other intention other than my intention is to breathe. And when, not if, but when my attention becomes pulled away from that, notice. Go back to the breath and do it again. And every time you do that, consider that's 1 rep. And when you get to like 2 million reps, I think you'll be all right.
Just 2 million, easy.
Easy stuff. I really think that's the way. And it gets wrapped up in meditation. It gets wrapped up in this big buzzword. But in order to practice that skill, that would be that best way. Yeah. Another way, might be not as much fun for the user, would be have somebody you care about give you honest feedback. Right? What are some things you've noticed about me that maybe I don't know? Maybe I didn't notice. And they can be great. They can be good. And a lot of times we don't handle positive emotion the way that we think we do.
You're looking real cute right now.
Yeah.
That's what I got for feedback for you.
Right on, yeah. It's the hair. But we shy away from some feedback, right? Good or bad. So that's 2 ways. That's two good ways. But I wish we had some more time. I'd love to talk about how self-awareness correlates to leadership and correlates to the way that we interact with others even more. I mean, we hit on it at the beginning, of course, but I'd like to interact. I'd like to really go through that. But maybe that'll be the next one.
Yeah.
Cool. So you can find this one on Spotify, YouTube, anywhere you can find podcasts. Simple Healthy Life podcast, and I think we'll have some links down below for you.
All right. Thanks, MJ.
Bye.